A violent storm was brewing over Willow Creek, but something far more powerful was quietly unfolding beneath the surface. When a broke, worn-down carpenter stopped to fix an old woman's collapsing roof for free, he had no idea who she really was, or what secret she'd been keeping for over 50 years. By morning, the man no one noticed would become the center of a town-wide mystery, and the heir to something far greater than money. The sky over Willow Creek had shifted from blue to gray in a matter of hours. Clouds piled high like angry waves frozen in the sky, and the air was thick with a pressure that made people nervous. The local radio warned of flash floods and high winds by nightfall. All across town, folks hammered boards over windows, rolled sandbags to doorways, and cleared out grocery stores. People prepared for impact. Everyone except Daniel Hayes. Daniel had no home to prepare. His home was the back of a rusting, dented Dodge Ram with one working window and a sleeping bag stuffed behind the driver's seat. He hadn't lived in a house in 2 years. The back injury he got from a fall at a construction site had cost him his job, and medical bills swallowed everything he'd saved. Since then, he'd been picking up odd carpentry work wherever he could. Fences, broken porch steps, minor fixes. Most jobs paid cash. Most weeks he barely ate. That morning he'd walked into Bailey's Hardware with hope and left with nothing. He asked the owner, Mr. Bailey, for a line of credit to buy basic materials. Nails, wood sealant, screws. Bailey refused. Too many IOUs in this town, he'd said without looking up. I can't feed my kids on promises. Daniel didn't argue. He just nodded, walked back to his truck, and drove through town, not sure where he was going. That's when he saw her, an elderly woman, easily in her 80s, teetering on a wooden ladder beside a sagging roof. He hit the brakes. She was on the 3rd rung, reaching for a loose shingle with one hand and gripping the edge of the gutter with the other. Wind tugged at her sweater. Her grey hair fluttered like loose threads in a storm. From where he sat, she looked like one strong gust away from being thrown to the ground. Daniel got out, approached slowly. Ma'am, he called, you shouldn't be up there. The woman looked down, startled. If I don't do it, who will? She snapped, but her voice trembled more than it scolded. Daniel stepped closer. Let me help, please. That roof isn't gonna last the storm. She eyed him, torn jeans, tired eyes, calloused hands. Not a threat, just a man trying. Finally she nodded and climbed down slowly, holding the railing like it was made of gold. I'm Alara. Most people just call me crazy old widow Alara. You don't look like the judgmental type though. Daniel offered a small grin. Name's Daniel. I fix things, usually better than I fix my own life. She laughed, a dry, wheezy sound that hinted at years of loneliness. Well, Daniel, I got no money to offer, but if you fix that roof, I'll feed you till your stomach stops growling. Daniel looked at the roof, curled shingles, water damage, mold creeping under cracked planks. It was a mess, but he'd seen worse. He nodded, went to his truck, pulled out his worn-down toolbox with the broken latch, and got to work. No tarp, no power tools, just nails, a hammer, and sheer determination. For the next 5 hours, he worked like a man possessed. He balanced on loose beams, pulled up rotten boards, and replaced them with whatever he could find. Planks from an old shed, spare tiles from a half-collapsed barn behind the house. Sweat rolled down his face. His hands bled where the old wood splintered. Still, he didn't stop. He could. Alara watched from the porch, sipping sweet tea like it was a ritual. She didn't interrupt. She just watched. Occasionally, she'd offer a quiet comment. You got hands like my father. He was a builder too. Or that storm's gonna tear down more than shingles tonight. People forget what wind can do when it's angry. Daniel barely responded. He was focused, locked in. At one point the sky cracked with distant thunder, and a low wind rolled through the trees like a warning. As he hammered the final nail into the last plank, Alara brought him a glass of lemonade and a plate of sugar cookies. He was starving, but something about her calm, knowing look made him pause. You really live here alone? He asked. She nodded. 52 years, no kid, no husband anymore, just me, the ghosts, and this roof. Daniel chuckled. Well, the roof's safe now. Storm won't touch it tonight. She looked up at it, then back at him. You didn't have to do this. You didn't even ask who I was. He shrugged. Didn't matter. Her eyes locked onto his, sudden intensity in her voice. That's why it does matter, Daniel. You'll see. He didn't know what she meant. He just assumed it was the rambling of an old woman, grateful for him. But as he drove off into the dusk, stomach full and soul strangely light, he couldn't shake her final words. You'll see. Daniel parked his truck by the old diner at the corner of Main Street, hoping to grab a cheap cup of coffee and maybe a leftover biscuit if he was lucky. He was running on little sleep and sore muscles, but the kind of ache that felt good, the kind that came from honest work. The rain hadn't started yet, but the sky had turned a deep, unsettling charcoal. Thunder rolled in the distance like a warning drumbeat, and the town felt tense, like it was holding its breath. As he stepped through the diner door, the little bell overhead jingled, and something strange happened. Every conversation in the room stopped. Heads turned, forks hovered in midair. Even the radio seemed to lower its volume. That's him, a woman at the counter whispered. Daniel froze. Him who? A few folks nodded at him, faces half curious, half reverent. It wasn't hostility, it was something else. A look he hadn't seen in years. Recognition. Coffee? Asked the waitress, already pouring. On the house. He blinked. You sure? She just smiled. Miss Alara called us this morning. Said to treat you like family. Daniel took the coffee and sat at the far end booth. He couldn't figure out how a roof job, especially one done with scrap wood and rusty nails, could earn this kind of attention. He'd helped people before. No one had ever remembered 5 minutes later. Within minutes, a hot plate of eggs, toast and grits landed in front of him. Compliments of the kitchen, the cook said with a wink. Daniel was halfway through his food when the front door swung open. The sheriff stepped in, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark brown jacket with a silver badge that caught the low light of the room. The room quieted again. Daniel Hayes, he asked. Daniel stiffened. Yeah? The sheriff gave a small nod. Come with me. Miss Alara sent for you. A lump formed in Daniel's throat. He hadn't done anything wrong. Had she fallen? Was she okay? She all right? He asked. She's fine, the sheriff said. But she's got something for you. Says it's urgent. Daniel followed him out without another word, still chewing on confusion more than breakfast. The town watched him leave like he was walking into something much bigger than he realized. The ride back to Alara's house was quiet, except for the occasional sound of the police radio buzzing faintly. As they pulled up, Daniel noticed something odd. A sleek black town car with tinted windows sat parked at the end of the gravel drive. 2 men in tailored suits stood under the porch awning, briefcases in hand. This wasn't small-town business. This was something different. Daniel stepped out, brushing crumbs off his shirt, and hesitated at the base of the porch step. One of the suited men opened the door for him without a word. Inside, the house looked completely transformed. Gone were the dusty curtains and creaky floorboards. A cleaning crew must have been through. The fireplace crackled with a soft flame, and elegant oil paintings now lined the wall. It was like stepping into a museum that had been hiding in plain sight. Alara sat in a tall armchair by the fire, dressed not in her usual patched cardigan, but in a deep navy dress, pearls resting against her collarbone. She looked like royal. Come in, Daniel, she said, motioning gently. He walked in slowly, unsure of what world he had just entered. I imagine you have questions, she said softly. A few, he said, eyebrows raised. She reached for a thick folder on the table beside her and handed it to him. Inside are deeds. Over 100 properties in this town, stores, houses, offices, farmland. They're all mine. Well, were. Daniel opened the folder, eyes scanning the paperwork. What is this? She said, is the reason no one has been able to develop or destroy Willow Creek for decades. I've owned it all, through shell corporations and quiet trusts. The town thinks I'm just an old lady in a crumbling house. They never knew I held it all together from behind the curtain. Daniel swallowed hard. Why are you showing me this? Alara leaned in. Because I'm tired, Daniel. I've watched this town rot from greed, from neglect, from selfishness. I waited for someone who still gave without asking anything back. Yesterday, I found him. You don't know me, he said, almost a whisper. I know more than you think. I know your parents. I know your fall. I know you didn't stop being good just because the world turned cold on you. She pointed to the folder. I want you to manage this. To rebuild Willow Creek, not with profits in mind, but with purpose. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he clutched the documents. I'm just a carpenter. No, you're the one man who stopped when no one else did. That's the kind of man who should own the future. He looked down at the papers again, the weight of them almost too much to hold. Outside, thunder cracked once more, but it no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like a beginning. The news spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. By mid-morning the next day, the entire town was buzzing. People lined up at the diner, not for breakfast, but for answers. The local paper ran a front-page story with the headline, "The Carpenter Who Was Chosen." The news anchor from Charleston showed up in a white van with a camera crew, asking around for Mr. Hayes, the man who now holds the keys to Willow Creek. Daniel tried to avoid it all. Fame made him uncomfortable. He wasn't a man used to attention. He was used to being invisible. But Elara had insisted on a press conference, and by the time he arrived at the courthouse steps in a borrowed button-up shirt, the crowd had already gathered. Elara stood next to him, regal and composed. Despite her age, she didn't need a microphone. Her voice carried all the power of someone who had been silent for too long, and finally decided to speak. For 50 years, she began, I watched this town fall apart while people lined their pockets and forgot their neighbor's name. I kept the land to stop outsiders from gutting it, but I was waiting for someone worthy to take it further. She turned and looked at Daniel. Yesterday, this man fixed a roof, not because he was paid, not because he was asked, but because it was the right thing to do. And in doing so, he reminded me of what we've lost. Murmurs passed through the crowd. Some people looked shocked, others smiled like they were watching something sacred unfold. I'm transferring ownership of all my holdings into a new community trust, Elara continued. Daniel Hayes will manage it, not as a ruler, but as a steward. He will answer to the people, not to profit. Gasps. Claps. A few people cried. Daniel stepped up to speak. Voice shaky but strong. I don't know if I deserve this. I'm not some big shot or genius. I'm a guy who knows how to fix things with my hands. But maybe that's what we need right now, someone who knows how to rebuild from the ground up. The crowd erupted in applause. From that moment, everything changed. Daniel moved out of his truck and into a modest house on Cherry Lane. Ironically, a house once slated for demolition under a now defunct developer's plan. The first thing he did was hire local carpenters and electricians, people like him, many of whom had been unemployed for years. The town library, closed for over a decade, reopened within 2 months. Kids lined up for free books and after-school programs. The old community center was transformed into a hub for workshops, parenting classes and job training. Daniel created the Good Hands Fund, using the trust's earnings to support struggling families, veterans and the elderly. People stopped him in the street now, not for help but to thank him, and still he worked. He hammered nails. He sanded door frames. He showed up at food drives, not as a figurehead, but as a volunteer. The town changed because they saw him working beside them, not above them. But something still pulled at Daniel, something unanswered. One evening, weeks after everything had changed, he returned to Elara's porch. She was there, wrapped in a knitted shawl, sipping her usual sweet tea. The wind was cooler now. The storms had passed. Why me? He asked softly, sitting beside her. She smiled without turning. Because I've been watching you your whole life. Daniel looked over, surprised. Your father helped build half this town. He never had much, but he always showed up when someone needed a hand. Your mother brought me soup during the winter your family couldn't afford heat. You were raised right, Daniel. I knew you'd lost your way, but not your heart. He swallowed the lump rising in his throat. I wanted to believe someone like you still existed, she said, and then you showed up with nothing in your pocket, and fixed my roof like it was the Sistine Chapel. He laughed gently. You think I can really do that? She looked at him with those clear, unshakable eyes. You already are. That night, as Daniel walked home under a sky that had finally cleared, he passed the homes he once saw as decaying, forgotten. Now they looked different, alive, like the town had remembered itself. Children played in the yards. Lights glowed behind clean windows, and on every porch, someone sat and waved. And in that moment, Daniel understood. He hadn't just fixed a roof. He'd restored something far more fragile and far more powerful.